Matvei Michkov. The rumor came out over the weekend that his contract with SKA St. Petersburg was going to be terminated. That contract runs through the end of 2026. And the thought was, oh my God, does that mean he's coming? Is it happening? And listen, we've now run into this a few times with Russian players or players that play in the KHL and coming to the U.S., and it's seemingly coming out of nowhere. So we can go back to a couple. Alexei Kolosov is from Belarus, played in the KHL. There were a lot of questions about whether or not he would come over at the end of the year. When we had Keith Jones on Snow the Goalie on the Press Row show, a month and a half, 2 months before the season ended, he said, we have a lot of goalies in our pipeline, a lot of Russian goalies. Some might be here sooner than later. I think the implication was Kolosov would be coming over. And he did. Then over the weekend, the rumor comes out, Kolosov might go back to Belarus because he's homesick, or maybe it's because he's not happy that Ivan Fedotov is here, has been signed to a multi-million-dollar contract, and now Kolosov is blocked. Could it be that? Is he unhappy with how he adjusted to the North American game? Does he feel like he was put in a position to fail because he only got two starts, didn't start at all for the Phantoms in the postseason? All of that. There's a lot going on with Kolosov. And then we, of course, know the story, if you're a Flyers fan or you're even remotely aware of what happens in Flyers land, that Ivan Fedotov was signed to a contract by the Flyers 2 years ago. They put the picture out with him in the Flyers hat, he was supposed to be coming over. Then somehow Ivan Fedotov ended up in the back of an unmarked van, and then we find out days later, he has to go serve his military time, his 1 year required military service for the Russian military. And then it's oh my God, he's gone. The agent at that point, I think, put something out about fear of some foul play, not being able to communicate with his client. All that was not great. And then he apparently signs this contract to play in Russia again. It seemingly invalidates his deal with the Flyers. It goes to international court, the IIHF. They rule that he and the KHL have broken the terms of employment because he was supposed to play for the Flyers. It was a binding contract and they're violating it. They then sanctioned that team, and they sanctioned Fedotov that he couldn't play in international tournaments. And then this past year, out of nowhere, there's the report that they might terminate Fedotov's last year of his contract, and that would mean that he could come over and play with the Flyers if he wants. And then, as we all know, within 2 days, Fedotov is stateside with all new pads in the midst of a playoff push. And it's holy shit, this thing that we never thought was going to happen is finally happening. It all kind of plays back into what happened over the weekend and what could very well happen here in the next week or so, which is the rumor that Matvei Michkov could potentially be coming to the U.S. far sooner than expected. So I'm going to roll with two things here that Craig pulled up. One is an Anthony tweet, and one is from Hockey News Hub. Now, I will say this. I know that I am a jackass. I get it, okay? There are times that I am 100% certifiably a jackass. Craig is laughing. That's $20,000 off the salary. Very sad. Hate to see it. Why do bad things happen to good people? But Hockey News Hub, whoever this guy is, has done a very good job of keeping the U.S. audience aware of what's happening in the KHL, has been at the forefront of Kolosov news, has been at the forefront of Fedotov news, has really been on it. And if we go back a few years, there was the NRD guy, NHL Rumors Daily, who we actually did meet and we knew was plugged in with a number of teams. So I'm not going to say that nameless accounts are always full of shit. Okay? Sometimes they do provide real stuff. Crimson says, you're not a jackass, you're a real, you are real. I think it's supposed to be dude, but it says dud. So I'm you're not a jackass, you're a dud. And I think that's why Craig pulled it up. A real dude. See, there we go. Love Crimson Kid. Crimson Kid, you can come back anytime. But I look at this Hockey News Hub thing and I say, because of the past precedent they've set here with being at the forefront of some of this KHL news, translating it, and putting it in front of the American audience, I'm going to say, this person is at least aware of what's happening. At the very least, is monitoring this stuff and is relatively on top of it. I'm sure that there's somebody who can point out, not in this chat, at least, and probably not in this show. There might be somebody who's a European / KHL expert who is like monitoring everything Hockey News Hub says and is trying to figure out who it is and all that, and is going to, like, has like a way to discredit some of their reports or scoops or whatever. But like, this person has been at it. So Hockey News Hub translated a quote from Roman Rentberg, the coach at SKA St. Petersburg, and the comment from over the weekend, and there were two. There was one, I think, from the president of the team again, and then there was one from Rentberg. But it was, Michkov will continue his career in Philadelphia. The contract with St. Petersburg club will be terminated until 2026. Rights to the hockey player in the KHL will remain with the Russian Army team. So what that means is St. Petersburg is the Russian Army team. In theory, if Michkov were to come to the U.S. and play for the Flyers, great. His rights would, in theory, still remain with St. Petersburg if he were ever to come back to the KHL. That's my interpretation, is that he wouldn't have a standing contract. It's just that among the KHL teams, they would all acknowledge that through his termination of that contract, they would have like first right of refusal for him when he comes back to the KHL, if he ever does. Maybe he'll be like Kovalchuk and he'll go back when he's like 42 and play. I have no idea, okay? But there was a reputable outlet in Russia that picked up the report, and they ran with it, and they apparently are quite reputable. But anyway, Hockey News Hub goes on to clarify. It means Michkov's contract that would expire in 2026 will be terminated. They'll retain his rights until 2026. The thing that's tricky, and the thing that a lot of people have been trying to put together in all of this, is European leagues use a loan system. If you are a soccer fan, you are acutely aware of what that looks like. If you're a U.S. sports fan, you might have no idea. So allow me very briefly to explain what a transfer is and what a loan is. In European sports, you have two choices. You can send a player away for good, akin to like what a trade would be, but sometimes there's no player going the other way. It's just money. Transfer. You're effectively selling that player to another team. Then there's a loan. And a loan is effectively, I'm going to take this player, I'm going to send them to another team for a set period of time, usually season by season. I'm going to loan them to that team so they get more playing time, and then I'm going to have the rights to bring this player back. So like if the Phillies, for example, said, we want to see Cody Clemens continue to play, but not at the AAA level. We want to see him play against major league players. They could work out a loan with the Kansas City Royals or the Miami Marlins, which would be kind of funny, but they could loan him out and say, we want to see him play. He needs to be in the starting lineup for X amount of time, or he needs to at least have a chance to compete. This is what we'd like to see. These are the terms of the loan. And they send him away. Maybe they say for 3 months. Maybe they say until the call-ups right before the playoffs, right? Or maybe they say he's going to stay there for the rest of the year, and the next year when you're starting spring training, you maybe bring him back, right? It would be, I don't know, like Jordan Mailata would be a really good example of this. A guy who hadn't played in the NFL, hadn't played professional football. Instead of having him try to learn with the rest of the Eagles or run the risk of sending him to the practice squad, they could say, hey, we're going to send him to the Jaguars when they were especially bad, or like the Browns when they were especially bad. The Panthers now would be a good example. The Eagles had a late-round draft pick this year who I think they're trying to turn into Mailata 2.0. If they said, hey, there's no way for this guy to play for us this year, but the Panthers suck, we're going to send him there for the 2024-25 season, that's the negotiation. The team still pays them. They go get their playing time at the same league, top league level for that period of time. So what's interesting in all of this is if St. Petersburg were to invalidate or to terminate the contract that Michkov has through 2026, like I said, they could maybe have a tacit agreement with the rest of the KHL that if he ever does come back over, he's our player. But realistically and legally, if they terminate that deal, the Flyers have drafted Michkov. He and his agent could negotiate his way to the U.S. and to play for the Flyers. Now, the president of the St. Petersburg team said a few weeks ago, or maybe it was at the end of April, which would be a few weeks ago, that he expected news on this to be out by June, and that the player would like to go play for the Flyers at some point. They have a good relationship with the Flyers, that there's been business that's been done in the past. They feel fine about it, all that. Michkov has now twice, back-to-back years, been loaned out from St. Petersburg, who's the top team, out to Sochi, which is a lower end of the spectrum team in the KHL. I don't necessarily get the feeling that the St. Petersburg team is going to want to guarantee Michkov a spot on their roster. I don't get the feeling that they want to invest what they consider to be time and money into a player that ultimately has a contract standing for 2026 to go play in the NHL. And it might behoove them to just say, he's a young player, we're not going to invest. Why are we going to send him off to another KHL team where we would maybe only get him back for the 25-26 season? We can kill off this contract, invalidate it. He can go play in the NHL. We've now done more business with this NHL team that perhaps we can figure out a way to continue to do business in the future. And like there is a benefit to St. Petersburg in doing it. For Michkov, obviously, it's a huge deal because he would be able to come over, sign his ELC. He would play for the Flyers from Jump Street. This wouldn't be a Cutter Gauthier situation where like he demands to get a spot, allegedly, and the Flyers say no, allegedly. I don't ever envision a scenario where Michkov is allowed to get out of the last 2 years of his KHL deal, come over stateside, and then have the Flyers say, you know what, Phantoms, that's more your speed to start. I don't see that. The president of St. Petersburg a few weeks ago said that they would like a provision that if they send Michkov over to the U.S. and he doesn't make the Flyers, that he comes back to Russia instead of playing in the AHL. Again, I don't see how that could happen. There are a few reasons for that. One of them is just legally, it's a problem. You can't loan a guy from the NHL back to the KHL. The Flyers in the past with Kolosov did something similar where they burned a year of his ELC and allowed him to play abroad. In theory, they could do that with Michkov, but because of how important he is to the rebuild and how important he is, they believe, long-term, it seems to me entirely unlikely that they would bring him over, determine he's not going to play at the NHL level, have this agreement with the KHL that they're going to send him back for a year, and burn a year of his ELC. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. And so we get into the legalities now. Like, there are legitimate legalities and questions around, can they even wing it? Can they even make it happen? Because a few years ago, there had been a provision in place that NHL teams and KHL teams could negotiate directly. It could be out in the open, in public. They could negotiate a buyout of a player's contract in the KHL and have them come over to the NHL. So as of I think it was 4 years ago, the Flyers and Comcast would have had the ability to negotiate publicly. It could have been speculated about in the news that they are working on a buyout with St. Petersburg to bring him over. However, because of this change, and I think it was around COVID, that provision got nixed. So there is no standing provision right now between the NHL and KHL to allow an NHL team to buy out the KHL contract. If there were, this would have been done by now. This probably would have been done as soon as he was drafted. But because it doesn't exist anymore, the Flyers can't do that. Now, the provision that does exist is the player has to be able to provide the money for his own buyout. So you look at it and you say, if Michkov were to come over and sign his ELC, that only pays so much. He's not going to be a multi-millionaire from Jump Street when he comes over to play for the Flyers. So then you get into a whole bunch of, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Is there a deal to be made behind closed doors that could get worked out between somebody from the U.S. and somebody from Russia that makes everybody happy and they figure it out? Is it? And now the one legal thing I don't know is, if the Flyers were to somehow get money, or if Comcast were to somehow get money to the agency that represents Matvei Michkov, and they somehow, via a signing bonus of sorts, when he signs with the Flyers, perhaps an additional signing bonus, a performance bonus from the agency to the player, that he could take that money and then pay out his KHL contract, that maybe exists. I don't know. I genuinely don't. I think we can all kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and we can figure out that there are probably some different avenues to make this thing work, but none of this will ever go public. None of it. Absolutely none. If anything ever goes public, it's going to be Matvei Michkov provided the money for his buyout of his KHL contract. But I think we were all going to be able to say with a pretty straight face that perhaps a deal was worked out somewhere else. Now, if Michkov comes over, does it fundamentally alter what the Flyers are doing? Does it change their plan going forward? Does it take them from being a team that wants to rebuild for the next 2 years and turn them into a team that has moved up their timeline by a year and a half. It could. If you look at the Flyers roster, there are legitimate issues. We all know that, right? There are legitimate concerns with the locker room and how they reacted to the benching or the scratching of Coots, and how the locker room maybe feels about the head coach. There are legitimate things where the coach is older. There have been rumors in the past, there were when he was with Columbus, and since he's been in Philly, that maybe he'll want to move up at some point into the front office, move upstairs. Perhaps Brad Shaw, his assistant coach, could move in and be the head coach of the team. Craig Berube's now off the table. He goes to Toronto. Rod Brindamore's name has been thrown around. Hurricanes are out. Could potentially Rod the Bod end up back in Philadelphia? Seems quite unlikely, but who the hell knows? If he were to hit the open market, I guess that's a question to have. I'm just not sure. Okay, so there's that part of this. Does it change their timeline? Maybe. Crimson Cade says, stay the course and rebuild. I think that having Matvei here will entice UFAs to maybe signing here. Could be correct. Connor points out something that I think it was Flyers Nation caught that I don't see anymore, so maybe he was alerted to the fact that it was public. But Flyers Nation put out that on the BR Open Ice Instagram post that threw out the idea that Michkov could play in the U.S., play for the Flyers. Michkov liked it on Instagram. And when I've gone on Instagram since and tried to look for that like from Michkov's account, it's no longer there. So it might have been a temporary thing. Maybe somebody pointed it out and he took it down. But that's interesting. So a lot of people have been reading into it. So there's that as well. Oh, shit. All right, never mind. I totally missed the news. Brindamore got re-signed yesterday. There we go. So it's out. So you got Torts. You got Torts, guys. It's just Torts. Hilferty came on the press row show and said Torts is going to be back. All right. Brindamore is off the table. Berube's off the table. Those are two guys that, in theory, have a history with this organization. Perhaps would have been interesting. Those are off the table. I totally missed it yesterday. That's my B. I'm going to be better. I'm going to be better. That's on me. Craig, that's on me. That's on me. All right, so there's that part of it as well. I don't know. If Michkov comes over, maybe it accelerates things, but I don't think it's going to change everything. I don't necessarily think they're going to become huge players in free agency this year. I could be wrong, but they have a lot of dead cap going into the year. They still have the Couturier contract that they're either going to continue to roll with, or does him switching agents portend that perhaps there could be a request of a trade in the offseason or an openness to a trade? We'll have to see. But there's a lot of dead money on the cap. I don't think this is the year that you start to push the chips in. I've seen some Flyers fans on Twitter X, starting to throw out the idea that maybe they will get involved in free agency this year. If Michkov does come over, it does change things a bit, because then all of a sudden, there's your wunderkind. There, if you're a free agent and you want to believe that, like, all right, this team was on paper a pretty dog shit team. Torts coached them up. They almost made the playoffs. This kid that everybody thinks would have been in contention for the number one pick with Connor Bedard had he not been born in Russia, maybe that's worth signing with the Flyers. We'll find out. Like, I do think it's going to be an exciting offseason. If Michkov is here, but maybe he's already here. If he is, and he plays for the Flyers this year, it certainly could make things really interesting. And I will point out, I joked, okay? I joked that maybe Michkov is here. The only reason I'm joking, and also maybe not, I have no knowledge of it, but Fedotov, if you remember, it was like, oh my God, he's here. And then you kind of find out, well, he might have already been here for a few days before it was even announced that he was getting out of his contract. There were some murmurs of that. I don't know if any of that was ever actually confirmed or not, but like, Michkov might be here. Maybe he is. Maybe he's in Dubai. I think last year when their season ended in the KHL, he ended up in Dubai, and then people were like, oh, get him out. Get him out. Go scoop him up in Dubai. We'll see. Sean C. says, imagine if he skates in July at Dev Camp. They'll be turning people away at the door. I totally agree. Michkov on the Press Row Show opening night. Listen, my only downside to Michkov coming over sooner is that I have made an agreement with myself from the day that they drafted him that I was going to learn enough Russian to interview Michkov by the time he got over here. And now if he comes over a year and a half before he's supposed to, that puts me in a bit of a bind because I don't know a ton of Russian. I can't interview him yet. Now I have to add that to my plate as like another thing to do and another thing to learn. So we're gonna have to work on that. But if he comes over, Great. We'll figure it out. Fedotov, I was excited about. And then it turns out he can actually speak pretty passable English. Michkov, though, I have no idea. We have no idea if Michkov can speak any English. Perhaps we'll find out sooner than later.